I'm Dorothy Wilson, 67 years old, and yesterday was my retirement celebration after 40 years of teaching elementary school. That evening, my son Wallace gave me his gift, a janitorial position at his company. "I don't feed extra mouths in my house, Mom," he said with cold eyes I barely recognized. Stunned but composed, I agreed to start the next morning. What he didn't know was that I had no intention of showing up. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe families should support each other rather than exploit each other, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Teaching at Oak Ridge Elementary School defined my life for 4 decades. I taught 3rd grade most of those years, watching thousands of children grow, learn, and move forward in their lives. The classroom was my second home, a place where I could make a difference every single day. Even on the hardest days, those little faces looking up at me made it all worthwhile. But being a teacher wasn't my only job. When my husband Frank died suddenly of a heart attack, Wallace was only 8 years old. The loss devastated us both. Frank had been a loving father and husband, the kind of man who played catch in the backyard and helped with homework every night. His death left an enormous hole in our lives, and it left me as the sole provider for our son. One teacher's salary wasn't enough to give Wallace the opportunities one knew Frank would have wanted for him. So I took on weekend waitressing at the Bluebird Diner downtown, serving pancakes and coffee with a smile no matter how exhausted I felt. In the evenings, I tutored struggling students, often not getting home until after 9. Wallace would be asleep by then, his homework done, a sandwich wrapper in the trash. He became so independent so quickly. Our small house needed repairs I couldn't afford. The roof leaked during heavy rains, and we'd set out buckets to catch the water. The furnace made frightening noises during winter, but replacing it was out of the question. My car was an old Buick that Frank had maintained, and I learned basic mechanics from library books to keep it running. Vacations were day trips to the lake or visiting my sister Madeline in the next county. Wallace never complained, but I saw the longing in his eyes when his friends talked about their family trips to Disney World or summer camps. Every extra penny went into Wallace's college fund. I'd stay up late clipping coupons at the kitchen table, calculating how to stretch our grocery budget. When Wallace needed braces, I took out a small loan. When he joined the debate team and needed a suit for competitions, I found one at a thrift store and altered it myself. My own clothes came from clearance racks, and I wore the same winter coat for 15 years. Wallace was a bright boy who became an ambitious teenager. He excelled in school, particularly in math and science. His teachers praised his analytical mind and work ethic. I was so proud watching him graduate as valedictorian, knowing all our sacrifices had helped him reach that moment. In his speech, he thanked me, saying he wouldn't be there without my support and love. People in the audience turned to smile at me as I wiped away tears. Stanford University offered him a partial scholarship, but even with that, the costs were overwhelming. I remortgaged our house to help cover tuition. During those college years, I barely saw him. He came home for Christmas but spent summers doing internships at prestigious companies. I understood. This was his future, his chance to build a life beyond what I could provide. After college, Wallace was hired by Meridian Technologies, a software company where he quickly rose through the ranks. He married Veronica, a marketing executive he met at work, and they had 2 children, Cody, now 10, and Harper, 7. My grandchildren became the joy of my life. Wallace and his family moved to a large house in an upscale neighborhood about 40 minutes from my home. Their house had 5 bedrooms, a pool, and a 3-car garage. It was everything I'd hoped Wallace would achieve. But somewhere along the way, my sweet, grateful son changed. Success hardened something in him. Our phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. When I visited, he'd often be working in his home office or taking business calls. Veronica was polite but distant. Only the children seemed genuinely happy to see me, running to the door when I arrived. My teacher's pension would be modest, around $2,800 a month. I'd managed to save about $45,000 over the years, carefully setting aside small amounts whenever possible. It wasn't much for retirement, but I owned my house outright after finally paying off the second mortgage, and my needs were simple. I planned to travel a little, nothing extravagant, just seeing some national parks I'd always wanted to visit. I looked forward to spending more time in my garden, growing vegetables and flowers. The local literacy center needed volunteers, and I'd already signed up to help adults learn to read. 3 months before my retirement, Wallace invited me to Sunday dinner. After the children went upstairs to play, he brought up my plans. "Mom, that little house of yours is falling apart," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "The neighborhood isn't what it used to be either." "I'm comfortable there," I replied. "I've put aside some money for repairs." Veronica set down her dessert fork. "We've been talking, Dorothy. We think you should sell your house and move in with us after retirement. We have that extra bedroom on the main floor." "That's very generous," I said, surprised by the offer. "But I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Wallace said. "It makes financial sense. Your pension won't go far these days. You could rent out your house for income. Plus, you could help with the kids after school." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. My son wanted me closer. Wasn't that what I'd hoped for? And helping with my grandchildren would be a joy, not a burden. Over the next few months, Wallace made more comments about finances. "Those property taxes must be killing you. Or healthcare costs will eat up most of your pension." Each remark chipped away at my confidence. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I couldn't manage on my own. A week before retirement, I agreed to move in with them. Wallace helped pack up my essential belongings, and we decided to rent out my house through a property management company. The rental income would go into my account, giving me a little extra each month. The rest of my things went into their basement for storage. The small bedroom they gave me had been their home office. It had just enough space for a twin bed, a dresser, and a small desk. The window overlooked their perfectly manicured backyard. It wasn't home, but I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured out my next steps. What I didn't tell Wallace was that my financial situation wasn't quite as dire as he assumed. My sister Madeline had left me a modest inheritance when she passed away 3 years ago, about $130,000 that I'd invested conservatively. I never mentioned it to Wallace, initially planning to leave it to him and the grandchildren eventually. Something told me to keep that information to myself, and now I'm glad I did. My last day at Oak Ridge Elementary was everything I could have hoped for. The school gymnasium was decorated with handmade banners from every class. "We'll miss you, Mrs. Wilson," they proclaimed in rainbow colors and childish handwriting. 40 years of teaching distilled into an afternoon of celebration. Principal Reed, who had once been my student, gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. "Mrs. Wilson didn't just teach us reading and arithmetic," he said. "She taught us perseverance, kindness, and the power of believing in ourselves." Generations of Oak Ridge children stand on the foundation she built. Former students, some now with children of their own, came to share memories. "You helped me overcome my stutter," said Thomas Garcia, now a confident attorney. "You never let me give up," said Melissa Campbell, a pediatric nurse. Each story felt like a gift, confirmation that my life's work had mattered. The current third-grade class performed a song they'd written for me, their high voices slightly off-key but full of enthusiasm. They presented me with a scrapbook containing a page from each student, colorful drawings and heartfelt messages that I knew I would treasure forever. My colleagues gave me a garden bench with a plaque reading, "A teacher plants seeds that grow forever." They knew how much I looked forward to spending time in my garden during retirement. We hugged and promised to meet regularly for lunch or coffee, to keep our friendships alive beyond school walls. Throughout the ceremony, I noticed Wallace checking his watch repeatedly. He stood at the back of the gymnasium, slightly removed from the proceedings, scrolling through emails on his phone when he thought no one was watching. Veronica seemed more engaged, taking photos and chatting politely with other parents. Cody and Harper sat in the front row, beaming with pride that the celebration was for their grandmother. After the ceremony, Wallace insisted on taking us all to dinner at Salvatore's, an Italian restaurant I'd always considered a special occasion place. "Only the best for your retirement, Mom," he said, ordering an expensive bottle of wine and encouraging me to choose whatever I wanted from the menu. The grandchildren were on their best behavior, and for a few hours, it felt like we were truly celebrating as a family. When we returned to Wallace's house, the children were sent upstairs to get ready for bed. I was settling into the armchair in the living room, still emotional from the day's events, when Wallace cleared his throat. "Mom, I have a surprise for you," he said, sitting across from me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I've been talking to some people at work, and I've arranged a position for you at Meridian." "A position?" I repeated, confused. "Wallace, I've just retired." "It's perfect timing," he continued, his voice taking on the same tone he used for business presentations. "The company needs someone reliable for the janitorial staff. Night shift, so it won't interfere with helping Veronica with the kids during the day." I stared at him, certain this was some kind of joke. "Janitorial staff? Wallace, I'm 67 years old. Age is just a number, Mom. You've always been active. And it's mostly emptying trash cans, vacuuming, that sort of thing. Minimum wage, but every little bit helps, right?" He smiled as if he just offered me a winning lottery ticket. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "I just retired today after teaching for 40 years. And now you have a new opportunity," he said, his smile faltering slightly. "Look, Mom, it will keep you busy and contributing to the household. You can't just sit around all day." Veronica stood silently by the kitchen doorway, her eyes fixed on the floor. I could see discomfort in the set of her shoulders, but she said nothing. "Contributing to the household?" I echoed. "Wallace, I'm paying rent from my property income. We agreed on that amount when I moved in." His expression hardened. "That barely covers utilities and food, Mom. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to run this household? I don't feed extra mouths in my house. Everyone needs to pull their weight." The word struck me like a physical blow. Extra mouth. As if I were a stray cat he'd reluctantly taken in. As if I hadn't sacrificed everything to give him the life he now enjoyed. As if I were a burden rather than his mother. From the staircase came a small gasp. Harper stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide. She'd heard everything. Behind her, Cody appeared, his young face confused and troubled. "Kids, go back upstairs," Veronica said quickly, finally breaking her silence. "But Dad, Grandma isn't an extra mouth," Cody protested. "She's family." Wallace's face flushed. "Upstairs. Now, this is adult business." The children retreated, casting worried glances back at me. My heart broke for them as much as for myself. What lessons were they learning about how to treat family, about respect and gratitude? I took a deep breath, fighting to maintain my composure. This was not the son I raised. This was not the man I thought he'd become. But in this moment, with shocking clarity, I saw him for who he truly was. "What time should I be ready?" I asked quietly. Wallace looked relieved. "They need you there at 11 p.m. I'll drive you tonight for the orientation, but after that you can take the bus. There's a stop about a mile from here. A mile walk to a bus stop at midnight. After cleaning offices until the early morning hours. Then back home to help with his children." This was what my son thought I deserved after a lifetime of service to others. After everything I'd sacrificed for him. "I'll get changed," I said, rising from the chair with as much dignity as I could muster. As I walked to my small bedroom, memories flooded through me. Wallace's 8th birthday, when I worked double shifts for weeks to buy him the bicycle he wanted. His high school graduation, where I'd worn a dress I'd sewn myself because I couldn't afford a new one. The look of pride on his face when he got his acceptance letter to Stanford, not knowing I'd stayed up all night wondering how I would pay for it. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. For the first time, I saw with complete clarity that my son viewed me as a transaction, a resource to be used. Not as the mother who had given him everything. When Wallace called that it was time to leave, I emerged wearing practical shoes and the clothes I'd worn to work countless times as a teacher. He didn't notice the flatness in my voice as I agreed to his instructions about the job. He didn't see the decision forming in my mind as he drove me to the Meridian Technologies building, lecturing me about punctuality and proper cleaning procedures. The orientation was brief and impersonal. Wallace spoke to the night supervisor as if I weren't there, explaining that I was eager to stay active during retirement. The supervisor looked doubtful, glancing at my age and teacher's hands, but Wallace was an executive, so no objections were raised. "I'll expect you home by 7 a.m., Wallace said as he prepared to leave. "The kids need breakfast at 7:30 before school." I nodded, clutching the employee handbook I'd been given. "I'll be there." But as he walked away, leaving me standing in the sterile hallway of his corporate building. I knew with absolute certainty that I would not. That night, after Wallace dropped me back at his house, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow twin bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of his home. The hum of the central air conditioning, the occasional creak of expensive hardwood floors, the distant sound of Wallace and Veronica's voices from their bedroom down the hall. "I can't believe you said that to her," Veronica was saying, her voice barely audible. "About not feeding extra mouths. She's your mother, Wallace." "She needs to understand reality," he replied. "My company is struggling. The new product launch is failing. We're overextended on the house and the beach property. Her pension and that rental income could help us stay afloat." "So you got her a minimum wage janitorial job? At her age? After she just retired from teaching?" "It keeps her busy, gives her purpose. And every dollar helps right now." "The children heard you. What do you think that teaches them about how to treat us when we're older?" Their voices faded as they moved deeper into their room. I pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to process what I just learned. Wallace's business was in trouble. The large house, the expensive cars, the private schools for the children. It was all a house of cards on the verge of collapse. And somehow, my modest pension and rental income had become his solution. I rose quietly and went to the small desk where I'd placed some of my personal items. From my handbag, I retrieved an old leather address book, turning to the back section where I kept important documents. There was my bank statement, showing my savings of $45,000. There was the investment account statement from Madeline's inheritance, now grown to nearly $150,000 through careful management. There was the property assessment of my home, valued at $280,000 in the current market, completely paid off. I was not wealthy by any means, but I was not destitute either. I could live comfortably within my means for many years. Wallace had either genuinely misjudged my financial situation or, more likely, had seen an opportunity to use my resources for his own benefit. From the desk drawer, I pulled out a small wooden box where I kept special mementos. Inside were cards and letters from Wallace over the years. I found the one I was looking for, a card he'd sent during his second year at Stanford. "Mom," it read in his neat handwriting, "I just wanted you to know that I understand all you've sacrificed for me. Someday I hope to repay even a fraction of what you've given me. All my love, Wallace." Where had that grateful young man gone? When had he transformed into someone who could look at his own mother and see only what she could provide him? I put the card aside and found a small worn notebook. In it, I'd kept track of expenses related to Wallace's education and upbringing. Not because I'd ever intended to ask for repayment, but because in the hardest times, looking at those numbers reminded me what I was working for. College application fees, $500. First car insurance, $1,200 per year. Braces, $3,800. Stanford tuition contribution, $28,000 per year for 4 years, even with scholarships and student loans. The sacrifices went beyond money. I found medical records showing I'd postponed knee surgery for 3 years because Wallace needed a computer for college. The doctor's notes indicated significant pain and decreased mobility, but the surgery would have cost $11,000 even with insurance, money that I didn't have to spare. As I sat surrounded by these fragments of our shared past, clarity came to me. My son needed to remember who I was, not just his mother, but a woman who had made difficult choices, who had put his needs before her own for decades, who had strength he clearly no longer recognized. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 3:17 a.m. In less than 4 hours, Wallace would expect me to return from the janitorial job, make breakfast for his children, and begin my new role as unpaid nanny and household contributor. In less than 4 hours, he would discover that his plans had gone awry. I opened my suitcase, the one I'd not yet unpacked, and began to organize my essential belongings. Clothing, medications, important documents. I wrote a brief note on the stationery I found in the desk drawer. "I raised you better than this. When you remember who I really am, you'll find me." Then I sat in the armchair by the window, watching as the sky gradually lightened from black to deep blue to the first hints of dawn. I thought about the thousands of mornings I'd risen early to prepare for my students, to create lesson plans that would engage young minds, to grade papers and write encouraging comments. I thought about the mornings I'd worked at the diner, serving breakfast with a smile despite aching feet. I thought about the life I'd built, the difference I'd made. No, I would not be erased. I would not be diminished. I would not allow my son to reduce me to an extra mouth or a convenient source of income. As the first rays of sunlight touched the manicured lawn outside, I made my final decision. Wallace needed a lesson far more important than any I'd taught in my classroom. He needed to learn about respect, about gratitude, about seeing people for their true worth. And I would be the one to teach him. At precisely 5 a.m., I slipped out of Wallace's house with my single suitcase. The neighborhood was silent, houses dark behind their security systems and privacy fences. A taxi I'd called the night before waited at the end of the block, the driver discreetly flashing his lights when he saw me approach. "Good morning," he said as I settled into the back seat. "You're up early." "New beginnings," I replied, giving him the address of my friend Eleanor's house across town. I placed my brief note on the kitchen counter, where Wallace would find it. Next to it, I left my key to their house. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but subtlety had failed me. Eleanor Baker and I had taught together for 35 years. She'd retired 2 years earlier and had been urging me to join her in the good life ever since. Her modest ranch-style home had a comfortable guest room that she'd offered me many times over the years. When I called her at midnight, explaining the situation in a whispered conversation from the bathroom of Wallace's house, she didn't hesitate. "Come here right now," she'd insisted. "I'll be there in the morning," I promised. "There's something I need to do first." Now, as the taxi pulled into her driveway, I saw her silhouette at the window, then the front door opening. Eleanor rushed out in her robe and slippers, gray hair askew, arms outstretched. "Dorothy Wilson," she said, embracing me. "What in the world has that boy done?" I found myself crying then, the emotions I'd held in check all night finally breaking free. Eleanor led me inside, made coffee, and listened as I told her everything: Wallace's gift of a janitorial job, his cold statement about extra mouths, the overheard conversation about his financial troubles. "The nerve," Eleanor muttered, refilling my coffee cup. "After everything you did for him. I remember you grading papers in the hospital when you had pneumonia, because you couldn't afford to take more than 2 sick days." "He's forgotten who I am," I said simply. "So I'm going to remind him. By disappearing. By making him face the reality of my absence. By making him see what he's taken for granted." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You can stay here as long as you need. Your room is always ready." I turned my cell phone off and placed it in the drawer of the nightstand in Eleanor's guest room. Then I unpacked my few belongings, hanging clothes in the closet with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Across town, Wallace would be discovering my absence. I imagined him knocking on my bedroom door when I didn't appear to make breakfast, finding the room empty, the bed unslept in, reading my note with confusion, then irritation. His first reaction would be anger, assuming I was being difficult or dramatic. He'd check his phone for messages from me, finding none. He might call the Meridian Technologies night supervisor, learning that I'd never returned after orientation. His irritation would grow as he had to scramble to get the children ready for school himself, disrupting his morning routine. By midday, as I sat with Eleanor in her sunroom, drinking tea and watching birds at the feeder, Wallace would be moving from annoyed to concerned. He would call my cell phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. He might contact my closest friends, the ones he knew about, asking if they'd heard from me. What he didn't know was that I'd already called my small circle of friends, explaining the situation. Judith from the 3rd grade team, Barbara from the library, Regina from the church choir. They all agreed to express concern but profess ignorance if Wallace contacted them. "He gave you a janitorial job on your retirement day?" Judith had exclaimed. "Oh, I'm definitely not telling him anything." By afternoon, Wallace's boss would be questioning him about my absence. The night supervisor would have reported that the new cleaner never showed up. In a corporate environment like Meridian Technologies, gossip spread quickly. Executives who used their newly retired mothers as night janitors while living in luxury homes became subjects of whispered conversations and disapproving glances. Eleanor's phone rang around 4 p.m. She checked the caller ID and raised her eyebrows at me. "It's Wallace." I nodded and she answered, putting the call on speaker. "Eleanor? This is Wallace Wilson, Dorothy's son." "Yes, Wallace. How are you?" Eleanor's voice gave away nothing. "I'm trying to locate my mother. She was supposed to start a new position last night, but she never showed up. She's not answering her phone, and she left a strange note. I'm concerned." "Oh my," Eleanor said, sounding appropriately worried. "That doesn't sound like Dorothy at all. Have you called the hospital?" "Yes, and the police. They won't file a missing persons report yet. They say she's an adult who has only been out of contact for a few hours." His voice held genuine worry now. "If you hear from her, please tell her to call me immediately." "Of course I will," Eleanor promised, avoiding my eyes. "I hope you find her soon." After she hung up, we sat in silence for a moment. "He sounds truly concerned," Eleanor said finally. "He's concerned about appearances," I replied. "About what his colleagues think. About who will watch his children and clean his house." But even as I said it, I felt a twinge of doubt. Was there real worry in his voice? Did he care about me as his mother, not just as a resource? The next morning, Eleanor went out to buy groceries and returned with the local newspaper. On the second page was a small article. "Retired teacher missing, family concerned." There was a quote from Wallace, describing me as a dedicated educator who had selflessly contributed to the community for decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the third day, Wallace had contacted nearly everyone in my address book. My former principal, the parents of students I'd tutored, even my distant cousin in Florida. Each time the script was similar: concern, pleas for information, assurances that he just wanted to know I was safe. Eleanor's neighbor Patricia, who didn't know about our arrangement, reported seeing Wallace going door to door in the neighborhood, showing my photo and asking if anyone had seen me. "He looked terrible," Patricia told Eleanor over the fence. "Like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was crooked." On the fourth day, I called my property manager from Eleanor's landline to check on my house. The manager mentioned that Wallace had been there, demanding to search the property for me. When denied access due to the current tenant's privacy rights, he'd stood on the sidewalk for nearly an hour, just staring at the house where he'd grown up. That evening, Wallace's wife Veronica called Eleanor. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "if you know where Dorothy is, tell her the children are asking for her. Cody can't sleep. Harper cries every night. And Wallace." She paused. "I've never seen him like this. He's not eating. He just keeps saying he needs to find his mom." After Veronica hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, conflicted. My disappearance was having the intended effect, forcing Wallace to confront my absence, to recognize my value beyond what I could provide him. But I hadn't anticipated the impact on my grandchildren, whom I loved dearly and never wanted to hurt. "Maybe it's time," Eleanor suggested gently. "You've made your point." "Not quite yet," I said. "There's something else that needs to happen first." On the fifth day, Wallace finally tracked me down. Later, I learned he'd called every retired teacher from Oak Ridge Elementary, working his way through the staff directory, until someone inadvertently revealed that Eleanor and I were particularly close. He'd driven past her house 3 times before seeing my silhouette in the window. The doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m. Eleanor and I were having dinner in the kitchen when we heard it. We exchanged glances, and she rose to answer it. I heard the murmur of voices. Then Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "Dorothy," she said, "Wallace is here." I nodded, taking a moment to compose myself. Then I walked to the living room where my son stood, looking nothing like the polished executive who had dropped me off at Meridian Technologies 5 nights ago. Wallace's clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd clearly lost weight. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Mom," he whispered, "you're okay." "I'm perfectly fine," I said calmly. "Please sit down, Wallace. We need to talk." The living room of Eleanor's house became the stage for a conversation 40 years in the making. Wallace sat on the edge of the sofa, leaning forward with his hands clasped between his knees. I took the armchair opposite him, while Eleanor discreetly retreated to another part of the house, giving us privacy. "Why did you leave like that?" Wallace began, his voice hoarse. "Do you have any idea what we've been through? The police, the neighbors asking questions, the children crying every night. Why did it matter?" I asked quietly. "I'm just an extra mouth to feed, aren't I?" His face flushed. "Mom, I was stressed that night. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "I think you did, Wallace. I think you meant exactly what you said." I leaned forward slightly. "But what I want to know is why. Why would you offer to have me move in, only to treat me like a burden? Why would you give me a janitorial job on the day of my retirement?" Wallace ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "You don't understand. Things are complicated right now." "Then explain them to me." "I'm not a child, Wallace. I managed to raise you on my own, put you through college, and teach for 40 years. I think I can handle complicated." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Meridian is failing. The new software platform we invested everything in has critical flaws. We're losing clients every day." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "The house is mortgaged to the limit. We have 3 car payments. Cody and Harper's private school costs a fortune. We're drowning, Mom. And you thought I could save you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Your pension, the rental income from your house. It would help. Not solve everything, but help us stay afloat until I can turn things around." He hesitated. "And yes, having you help with the children would save us the cost of after-school care." "So you saw me as a financial resource, a convenient solution to your problems." "It wasn't just that," he protested. "I wanted you closer. The kids miss you." "Wallace," I said firmly, "I need you to listen carefully. I'm about to tell you some things you don't know." I reached into my handbag and removed several folded documents, placing them on the coffee table between us. "This is my current financial situation," I said, pushing the papers toward him. "My teacher's pension, my savings account, the investment account from Aunt Madeline's inheritance, the current market value of my home, which I own outright." Wallace picked up the papers, his expression changing as he read through them. "I had no idea," he murmured. "The inheritance. You never mentioned." "No, I didn't. I was saving it for you and the grandchildren eventually, but now I see that would have been a mistake." His head jerked up. "What do you mean?" "Money given without respect is never valued," I said. "You've forgotten something important, Wallace. I chose to move in with you. I didn't need to. I was financially secure and had plans for my retirement that didn't involve emptying trash cans at midnight." "Then why did you agree to move in?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Because you invited me. Because I thought you wanted me there as your mother, not as a financial solution. Because I love my grandchildren and wanted to be part of their daily lives." I paused. "I was wrong about your intentions." Wallace stared at the documents, then at me. "So all this time, you didn't need our help at all?"
No, Guayace.
"And frankly, it seems you're the one who needs help, not me." His shoulders slumped. "Everything's falling apart, Mom. The business, the lifestyle we've built. I don't know how to tell Veronica and the kids that we might lose it all." "Perhaps it's time for honesty," I suggested. "The same honesty I wish you'd shown me." "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Afraid of failing, of losing everything, of letting everyone down. When I realized your pension and the rental income could help us temporarily, it seemed like a solution. I convinced myself it was good for you too, keeping you active, giving you purpose. By having me clean offices at night and watch your children during the day? At 67 years old, after working my entire adult life." Tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." In that moment, I saw glimpses of the boy I'd raised, vulnerable, imperfect, human. The hardened executive facade had cracked, revealing the son I remembered. "The job wasn't just about money," he continued, wiping his eyes. I thought if the company saw you working there, they wouldn't suspect how bad things really are. It was about appearances as much as finances." I'm trying so desperately to project confidence, to convince everyone that everything's fine, that we can weather this storm. Oh, Wallace, I sighed. Did you really think using your retired mother as a janitor would project success? If anything, it made people question your character. He winced. My colleagues have been. There have been comments. No one said it directly, but I could see it in their eyes. As they should, I said firmly. What you did was wrong, Wallace. Not just getting me the job, but the way you spoke to me. The way you've treated me since I moved in. As if my only value was what I could contribute financially, or through unpaid labor. I know, he whispered. I know it was wrong. These past 5 days, not knowing where you were, if you were safe, it made me realize what really matters. He looked up at me, his face etched with genuine remorse. I've become someone I don't recognize, someone obsessed with maintaining appearances and financial status. Someone who would use his own mother to prop up a failing facade. Yes, I agreed simply. You have. Can you ever forgive me? I studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw exhaustion, shame, and genuine regret. Forgiveness is possible, Wallace. But things can't go back to the way they were. I won't be moving back into your house to be used as a financial resource or unpaid help. I understand, he said quickly. Of course you wouldn't want to come back after how I treated you. That doesn't mean I don't want a relationship with you and the children, I continued. But it has to be based on mutual respect and honest communication. No more hidden agendas, no more treating me as less than I am. Wallace nodded, wiping away tears. What happens now? He asked, sounding lost. Now we have some difficult conversations about the future, about your business troubles and what realistic solutions might look like. About how to rebuild our relationship. About what kind of example you want to set for Cody and Harper. For the first time in our conversation, Wallace sat up straighter, a flash of his old confidence returning. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. To be the son you deserve. I hope so, I said. Because I'm willing to help you through this difficult time, Wallace. Not as an obligation, but as your mother who loves you despite everything. But my help comes with conditions. Name them, he said immediately. First, complete honesty from now on. I want to know the full extent of your financial situation. He nodded. Second, I'll be moving back to my own house. The tenant's lease expires next month, and I won't be renewing it. But Mom, your house needs repairs and dash. I held up my hand. My house is my home, Wallace. I'll handle the repairs. Which brings me to my third condition. I am not your financial solution. I'll help where I reasonably can, but I won't sacrifice my retirement security for a lifestyle you can't afford. He swallowed hard but nodded again. Finally, I said, my voice softening slightly, I want us to rebuild our relationship as mother and son, not as financial resources for each other. That means regular family dinners, time with my grandchildren, and mutual respect. Wallace was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I accept your conditions. All of them. And I'll add one more. I'll get professional financial help to restructure the business and our personal finances. No more magical thinking. No more looking for easy solutions. That's a good start, I acknowledged. He hesitated, then asked, will you come home with me tonight? Just to let the kids know you're okay? They've been so worried. I considered the request. I'll come for dinner tomorrow, I decided. That will give you time to explain to Veronica and the children what's happened, without blaming or making excuses. They deserve the truth, Wallace, in an age-appropriate way. You're right, he agreed. As usual. As he stood to leave, Wallace looked around Eleanor's comfortable living room. Thank you for taking care of my mother, he said when Eleanor returned to see him out, and for helping her teach me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. Dorothy has always been an excellent teacher, Eleanor replied with a small smile. Even in retirement. After Wallace left, promising to call the next day to arrange dinner, Eleanor and I sat in silence for a while. Do you think he's sincere? She finally asked. I think he hit rock bottom and got a glimpse of who he's become, I replied. Whether that leads to lasting change depends on the choices he makes from here. But for the first time in years, I saw the sun I remember in his eyes. And you? Eleanor pressed. Are you okay with helping him after what he did? I considered the question carefully. He's still my son, Eleanor. I won't enable his poor choices or sacrifice my security, but I won't abandon him either. That's not who I am. No, she agreed. That's never been who you are, Dorothy Wilson. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since my retirement. The future remained uncertain, but I had reclaimed my dignity and perhaps begun the process of reclaiming my son. The following evening, I arrived at Wallace's house at precisely 6 p.m. I'd taken care with my appearance, wearing a blue dress that Frank had always loved, my hair freshly styled. This wasn't vanity, it was armor. I wanted to walk into that house as Dorothy Wilson, retired educator and family matriarch, not as the diminished figure Wallace had tried to make me. Veronica opened the door before I could ring the bell. Her expression was a mixture of relief and shame. Dorothy, she said, embracing me awkwardly. Thank you for coming. Inside, the house was unusually quiet. The television wasn't blaring cartoons. No piano practice from Harper. No video game sounds from Cody's room. Wallace stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, looking nervous. The children are upstairs, he explained. I thought we adults should talk first. We sat around the dining room table, the same table where Wallace had announced his gift of a janitorial position just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I've told Veronica everything, Wallace began. About my financial mismanagement, about how I treated you, about your conditions for helping us. Veronica nodded, her eyes downcast. I should have said something that night, she said quietly. When Wallace spoke to you that way, I was shocked, but I stayed silent, and I'm deeply sorry for that. We've been living beyond our means for years, Wallace continued. Taking equity out of the house for investments that didn't pan out. Using credit cards to maintain appearances. The business has been struggling since the product launch failed 6 months ago. Why didn't you tell me things were difficult? I asked. Pride, Wallace admitted simply. I wanted you to see me as successful, as someone who had fulfilled all your sacrifices. And then when things started falling apart, I was too ashamed to admit it. I nearly left him, Veronica interjected. The night you disappeared. When the children were asleep, I told Wallace I couldn't stay with someone who would treat his mother that way. It made me wonder how he would treat me if I ever became inconvenient. Wallace reached for her hand. It was the wake-up call I needed. Beyond even Mom disappearing. The thought of losing my family, because of who I've become. We have an appointment with a financial advisor next week, Veronica added. Benjamin Harris. He specializes in debt restructuring and business recovery. And I've been completely transparent with my executive team, Wallace said. They were surprisingly supportive once I stopped pretending everything was fine. We're developing a recovery plan for the company. I nodded, taking this all in. And the children? We told them a simplified version of the truth, Veronica explained. That grandma left because Dad said unkind things, but that she's coming back to talk tonight. That we might need to make some changes in our lifestyle because Dad's business is having problems. How did they take it? Cody asked if we would be poor, Wallace said with a sad smile. I told him we might have less stuff, but we would never be poor as long as we had each other. It sounded corny, but he seemed to accept it. And Harper. She wanted to know if you were still mad at Daddy, Veronica said. I told her you were disappointed, but that families can work through difficult times if they're honest with each other. At that moment, the sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the children's arrival. They appeared in the doorway, hesitant at first, then rushing forward when they saw me. Grandma! Harper cried, throwing herself into my arms. Cody followed more sedately, but his hug was just as fierce. I missed you guys, I said, holding them close. Dad said he was mean to you, Cody stated bluntly. Your dad and I had a disagreement, I replied carefully. About respect and how family members should treat each other. Are you coming back to live with us? Harper asked hopefully. I glanced at Wallace, who nodded slightly, indicating I should be honest.
No, sweetheart.
I'm going to live in my own house again. But I'll visit often, And you can come stay with me sometimes too. Because of what Dad said? Cody pressed, always the more perceptive of the two. Partly, I acknowledged. But also because I need my own space just like you need yours. Grandma has been taking care of others for a very long time. Now I need some time to take care of myself too. The family dinner that followed was subdued but genuine. Wallace had prepared a simple meal himself, something I'd never seen him do before. The conversation was careful but increasingly comfortable as the evening progressed. When it was time for the children's bedtime, I read them stories as I used to do, treasuring their sleepy questions and spontaneous hugs. Afterward, Wallace, Veronica, and I finalized our plan moving forward. I would return to my house when the tenant's lease expired. In the meantime, I would stay with Eleanor, whose guest room had become a sanctuary. Wallace would work with the financial advisor to create a sustainable plan for their family and business. I can offer some limited financial help, I told them. A loan with clear terms and a repayment schedule, not a gift. But only after you've developed a realistic budget and started making necessary lifestyle changes. That's more than fair, Wallace agreed. More than I deserve. It's not about deserving, I said. It's about family helping family while maintaining healthy boundaries. Over the following weeks, those boundaries were tested and strengthened. Wallace and Veronica met with Benjamin Harris, the financial advisor, who helped them create a comprehensive debt reduction plan. It required difficult choices. Selling one of their cars, cutting back on unnecessary expenses, considering more affordable schooling options for the children. Dr. Jenkins, a family therapist recommended by Eleanor, began meeting with all of us, sometimes individually, sometimes in various groupings. In one particularly powerful session, Wallace finally expressed the pressure he'd felt trying to live up to what he perceived as my expectations. You worked so hard to give me opportunities, he said. 3 jobs, no vacations, postponing your own needs. I felt I had to succeed spectacularly to make all that sacrifice worthwhile. I never wanted spectacular success, I told him. I wanted you to be a good person who used his gifts well and treated others with kindness. Somewhere along the way, you confused financial achievement with personal worth. Like father, like son, he said quietly. Dad was the same way before he died, wasn't he? Always chasing the next promotion, the bigger house. The observation startled me. Frank had indeed been ambitious, sometimes to a fault. Had I inadvertently reinforced those same values in Wallace by praising academic and career achievements above character? These revelations didn't excuse Wallace's behavior, but they helped us understand the complex dynamics that had led us to this point. Healing would require effort from all of us, not just him. By the time my tenant's lease expired, I was more than ready to return to my own home. Wallace insisted on hiring professional cleaners before I moved back in, and he personally supervised repairs to the roof and furnace. Not as repayment, he emphasized, but as a son caring for his mother's well-being. The grandchildren helped me settle in, arranging my books on shelves and placing photos around the living room. Harper picked flowers from the garden for my kitchen table. Cody installed a video doorbell system, so we can check on you, Grandma, and you can see who's at the door without getting up. New family traditions emerged. Sunday dinners rotated between my house and theirs. Wallace and Veronica established clear boundaries around the children's time with me. They would visit regularly, but not as a childcare solution, rather as family maintaining loving connections. Wallace took a second job temporarily, consulting for a startup 3 evenings a week. It's not beneath me to work extra hours, he told me. You did it for years to support our family. I can do the same. His business slowly stabilized as he focused on core services rather than the failed new product. It would never be the empire he'd envisioned, but it provided a good living without the crushing pressure of unsustainable growth. One evening, about 4 months after my disappearance, Wallace stopped by unexpectedly. He brought a small potted orchid and a folder of papers. The first loan repayment, he said, handing me a check. Ahead of schedule. Thank you, I said, placing it carefully in my desk drawer. The prompt payment is appreciated, but even more, I appreciate the respect it represents. He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. I also wanted to show you this, he said, opening the folder. Inside was a college savings account statement for each grandchild. The balances were modest, but they represented a beginning. Veronica and I are contributing a small amount each month, he explained. We want them to have opportunities without the financial stress you experienced putting me through school. That's wonderful, Wallace. A true gift to their future. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think you could come with us to career day at Cody's school next month?" They asked for family members with different occupations, and I thought, 40 years of teaching experience would be valuable for the kids to hear about. The request touched me deeply, not because Wallace needed something from me, but because he genuinely valued what I had to contribute. I'd be honored, I told him. As spring turned to early summer, my retirement finally began to resemble what I'd originally envisioned. I planted vegetables in raised garden beds that Wallace and Cody built for me. I volunteered at the Literacy Center 3 mornings a week, helping adults learn to read. I joined Eleanor and other retired teachers for weekly coffee meetings where we shared stories and laughter. The relationship with my son wasn't perfect. We still had moments of tension, old patterns that threatened to resurface. But the foundation had shifted. Respect had replaced exploitation. Honesty had replaced manipulation. And most importantly, we saw each other clearly now, not as idealized versions or convenient resources, but as flawed, complex human beings worthy of love and dignity. 6 months after my retirement day, I sat on my garden bench, the one my colleagues had given me as a parting gift, watching butterflies visit the zinnias I'd planted in spring. The morning air was warm but not yet hot, carrying the scent of blooming roses and fresh-cut grass from my neighbor's yard. My home had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. The leaky roof was fixed, the temperamental furnace replaced. I'd painted the living room a soft sage green that brightened the space without being overwhelming. The kitchen cabinets, once dingy white, now gleamed with a fresh coat of paint and new hardware Wallace had installed one weekend. But the physical improvements were just outward manifestations of deeper changes. I was living the retirement I'd always envisioned, comfortable, purposeful, and on my own terms. 3 mornings a week, I taught literacy classes at the community center. My adult students included recent immigrants learning English, older adults who'd never had educational opportunities, and young people who'd fallen through the cracks of the school system. Their determination inspired me, reminding me why I'd chosen education as my life's work. Eleanor and I had formed a friendship group with 5 other retired teachers. We called ourselves the Book and Travel Club, though our activities extended far beyond those 2 pursuits. Last month, we'd taken a weekend trip to a nearby botanical garden. Next month, we planned to visit a coastal town none of us had seen before. Small adventures, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. My relationship with Wallace had found a new equilibrium. The weekly family dinners continued, alternating between my house and theirs. When they came to me, I prepared simple, nourishing meals. When I went to them, I noticed the scaling back of extravagance. The expensive wine replaced by more modest selections, the designer decor giving way to more personal touches. Wallace's business had stabilized under the restructuring plan Benjamin had helped create. It would never be the industry giant Wallace had once envisioned, but it provided a good living and, more importantly, no longer consumed every waking moment of his life. He coached Cody's soccer team now, something the old Wallace would never have had time for. Veronica had returned to work part-time at a marketing firm, contributing to the family's financial recovery, while maintaining balance for the children's sake. She and I had developed a relationship independent of Wallace, occasionally meeting for lunch or taking Harper shopping together. The grandchildren spent 1 weekend a month with me, a tradition we all cherished. During these visits, I taught them things their busy parents didn't always have time for. Harper was learning to bake bread from scratch, while Cody showed surprising aptitude for gardening. We played board games instead of video games, read books aloud, and took walks in the neighborhood park. One warm Saturday afternoon, Wallace stopped by unexpectedly. I was deadheading roses in the front yard when his car pulled up. "Need any help?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves without waiting for an answer. We worked side by side for an hour, the silence comfortable between us. Finally, he straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Remember how you always wanted to visit the Grand Canyon?" I nodded. It had been a dream of mine for years, one I'd mentioned occasionally but never pursued, always putting the needs of others first. Veronica and I were talking, he continued. We'd like to help make that happen for you. Not financially, he added quickly. I know you can afford it yourself. But with planning, maybe accompanying you if you'd like company. The offer touched me deeply, not because I needed their help, but because it represented a fundamental shift in Wallace's thinking. He was considering my dreams, my fulfillment, without any benefit to himself. I'd like that, I said simply. Later that evening, after Wallace had gone, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The pain of that retirement night remained a vivid memory, the shock of hearing my son refer to me as an extra mouth to feed, the humiliation of being offered a janitorial position after 40 years of teaching. But those wounds were healing, leaving behind not scars but wisdom. I'd learned that standing up for myself hadn't destroyed my relationship with Wallace. It had transformed it into something healthier. By refusing to be diminished, I had actually given my son the opportunity to become a better person. The grandchildren had learned valuable lessons too. They saw their grandmother as a person with dignity and boundaries, not just a resource to be used. They witnessed their father acknowledging mistakes and working to make amends. These experiences would shape their understanding of family relationships far more powerfully than any lecture could have done. My phone chimed with a text message from Eleanor. Book club voted. We're reading The Year of Yes next month. You in? I smiled and replied, absolutely. The phrase seemed fitting for this chapter of my life. After decades of putting others first, of saying yes to their needs while deferring my own, I was finally saying yes to myself, to my desires, my boundaries, my vision for these retirement years. This didn't mean neglecting family relationships. If anything, those connections had deepened through the crisis and reconciliation. But they now existed within a framework of mutual respect, rather than expectation or obligation. Wallace still had work to do. Old habits of prioritizing appearance over substance occasionally resurfaced. But his commitment to change seemed genuine, reinforced by the near loss of both his mother's presence and his wife's respect. As for me, I discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. The woman who walked out of Wallace's house that early morning 6 months ago had been hurt and angry, but also determined and self-respecting. She'd known her worth when others had forgotten it. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across my garden. Inside, a stack of travel brochures waited on the kitchen table. The Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the California coast. Places I'd dreamed of visiting but always put off for someday. Someday had finally arrived. Tomorrow, Wallace and the family would come for Sunday dinner. Veronica was bringing dessert. The grandchildren would tell me about their week. We would exist together as family should, supporting each other's dreams rather than exploiting each other's resources, celebrating our connections while respecting our individual journeys. This, I realized, was the most valuable lesson of all, that true family relationships aren't transactional. They're not measured in dollars contributed or services rendered. They're built on love, respect, and the recognition of each person's inherent dignity. My retirement hadn't gone according to plan. It had begun with betrayal and hurt, evolved through confrontation and truth-telling, and emerged into something I couldn't have imagined on that painful night 6 months ago. Something better, more authentic, more fulfilling. I picked up my garden tools and headed inside as twilight deepened into evening. Tomorrow would bring family, laughter, perhaps some lingering tensions. But tonight belonged to me alone. Dorothy Wilson, retired teacher, mother, grandmother, and woman who had finally learned that setting boundaries doesn't end relationships, transforms them. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who took you for granted? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories of family reconciliation and personal growth. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to value yourself as much as you value others.